After my diagnosis, my children took control of my estate, making decisions about my assets without consulting me. They assumed I wouldn't have the strength or means to fight back. But they were wrong. Feeling betrayed and pushed aside, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I made a bold, calculated move that would force them to face the consequences of their actions and give me back the control I'd lost. What happened next would change everything, leaving them stunned and rethinking their choices. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. It's strange how quickly everything can change. One moment, you're living a life you've carefully built, your days filled with routine, love, and purpose. The next, you're staring into a void you never saw coming. That's how it was for me. One afternoon, I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one by the window where I always watched the world go by. The sun filtered in, soft and warm, casting a gentle glow on the room. It was peaceful, almost comforting, until Daniel, my youngest son, walked in with that look on his face. His brow was furrowed, his mouth tight. Something was wrong. He stood there for a moment, hesitant, before he handed me an envelope. A part of me knew, even before I opened it, that it wasn't good news. My heart raced as I read the words, my hands trembling slightly as the world seemed to tilt beneath me. The diagnosis hit like a ton of bricks. Cancer. Aggressive. Advanced. The doctor's prognosis was grim. I don't even remember what else the letter said. I just remember those words, repeating in my mind like a mantra. Terminal. At first, I didn't know how to react. I sat there, numb, staring at the page as my son waited for some kind of response. But what could I say? How could I even begin to process the reality of what was happening? I had spent my entire life managing crises, solving problems, and now I was faced with something I couldn't fix. Something that wasn't just a challenge, but an enemy I couldn't defeat. My mind raced as I tried to absorb the information. How long? How bad is it? But the doctor had been blunt, and I could hear his voice in my head, even though he wasn't there. We need to start treatment immediately, but the chances of success are minimal. It's aggressive. Daniel was looking at me with worry in his eyes, but his expression wasn't just concern, it was something else, something that gnawed at me. His face was tight, as though he was holding back something, and for the first time, I wondered if there was more to this than just sympathy. I didn't speak for what felt like hours, just sitting there, letting the weight of the words settle on me. The shock. The disbelief. The helplessness. But even in the midst of this, I noticed something else, a distance in Daniel's gaze. He wasn't looking at me the way he normally did, as though he saw me as his mother. No, this time it felt different. It felt transactional. Mom, he said finally, breaking the silence, his voice soft but firm. We've been talking, and we think we should get the legal stuff sorted out. Just in case. The words stung, though I couldn't quite explain why at the time. Just in case. That was when the first seed of doubt was planted in my mind. But I didn't question it. I was too overwhelmed by the diagnosis to think clearly. I nodded numbly, agreeing to their suggestion. After all, I had always trusted them to handle things when I couldn't. They were my children, my pride, my joy, the ones I had worked so hard to provide for. They were family. In the following days, I did what I was told. I went to appointments, began the treatment plan, and tried my best to stay optimistic, though my body felt weaker with each passing day. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The way Daniel and Sarah began handling my estate, talking about selling the house and moving my assets into their names, it all felt rushed, unnecessary. But they kept reassuring me that they were just trying to lighten the load, trying to help me focus on getting better. It wasn't until a week later, when I had a moment to really think and breathe, that I began to see what was happening. My family had always been close, or so I thought. They were my everything. My children, each one had their own dreams and successes, and I had always supported them, even when it meant sacrificing my own desires. They knew how hard I had worked to build everything we had. The house, the property, the savings for their education, the business I'd started from nothing. It had all been for them. I wanted them to have it all. But now I felt like a stranger in my own life. The phone calls came more frequently. "We need you to sign this document, Mom." "Just a formality," Sarah would say, her voice calm and reassuring. But something in her tone was off. She was too calm. There was no urgency, no care for what I was going through, just an unspoken focus on the details. I should have questioned it earlier, but it wasn't until one evening when I asked to sit down with them, really sit down to talk through everything, that the full weight of what was happening crashed down on me. Sarah was at the table with Daniel, papers scattered in front of them, but they barely looked at me. Their eyes were focused on the documents, like it was business as usual. I felt invisible. "What's this?" I asked, my voice low, as I picked up one of the papers. It was a sale agreement for the house. They were selling it. Without consulting me. "Mom, we thought this would be the best move. You don't need the house with your condition, and it'll be easier for us to manage things without it hanging over our heads." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The house. The one I had poured years of work into. The home where they had grown up. Their home. And they were selling it without even asking me? Without a word of discussion? I felt like I was already being erased from their lives, like I didn't matter anymore. "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to sell the house." But Daniel just nodded, as though my opinion didn't matter. "It's the best for everyone, Mom. You'll see." That was when I realized the truth. This wasn't about helping me. This was about what they wanted. They saw me as a burden, a weight holding them back from getting what they felt entitled to. I was no longer the mother they had looked up to. I was a problem to be solved. I sat there in stunned silence, the full weight of the betrayal settling over me like a thick, suffocating fog. It wasn't just the house. It was everything. My life, my legacy, my very identity. It was slipping away. And I had no say in any of it. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. I still had a few cards left to play, and I was going to use them. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I wouldn't let them take everything from me. I didn't know how yet, but I would fight back. They thought they could push me aside, take what was mine, and leave me with nothing. But they were wrong. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. Before everything changed, my life had a rhythm. I had always been the one to make things happen. I wasn't born into wealth or privilege. My parents had worked hard to put food on the table, and there were days when I could see the stress in their eyes, when money was tight, and the future felt uncertain. I didn't want that for my own children. I wanted to give them everything I didn't have, the opportunities, the comfort, and the stability to feel secure in the world. That desire became my driving force. I took on every challenge, pushed through every obstacle, with one goal, to create a better life for them. It wasn't easy. There were years when I worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet. There were countless nights spent sitting at my kitchen table, doing paperwork or making calls, trying to keep our small business afloat. My dream was to build something solid, something I could pass down, something they could be proud of. But most of all, I wanted to give them the one thing I had never had: choices. I wanted them to have a future where they weren't burdened by financial worry, where they could choose their paths freely, without the heavy weight of survival pressing down on them. The business I built from the ground up had been the cornerstone of that dream. It wasn't glamorous at first, just a small shop in a rundown part of town, serving local customers who needed affordable products. But over the years, I expanded, reinvested, and grew it into something successful. By the time my children were teenagers, I had become a local figure of success. They saw me as a provider, a protector, a constant in their lives. But behind the success was sacrifice. My marriage to Robert, their father, had crumbled early on, worn down by years of stress and my relentless pursuit of success. I had always believed I could juggle everything. Being a mother, building a career, and keeping the household running smoothly. But the truth was, the strain of it all had taken its toll. Robert and I had grown distant, and eventually, we separated. The divorce wasn't ugly, but it was painful. The kids were affected, of course. But I did my best to shield them from the worst of it. I focused on their needs, on making sure they had the best opportunities, the best education, the best future I could provide. And I did that at the expense of my own personal life. The years I spent building my business were also the years I spent alone, working long hours and missing out on things that mattered. I told myself it was worth it. I had a vision of the future. My children successful, happy, and financially stable. They would never struggle like I had. When Daniel and Sarah were born, I thought I had it all figured out. My two youngest. They would grow up in a world of opportunity, their futures already laid out for them. I thought that with all I had given, they would never question me. I had provided for them, raised them with love and discipline, and worked tirelessly to ensure they would never want for anything. But now, in the midst of my illness, I was beginning to realize that maybe they had seen me not as a mother, but as a means to an end, a tool to achieve their own dreams, no matter what it cost me. I had always been there for them, every school play, every sports event, every family dinner. I gave everything I had to make sure they knew they were loved. And when they needed something, they came to me. When they wanted college tuition, I gave it to them. When they had big dreams, I supported them. When they were in debt, I helped bail them out. I never once hesitated. They were my children, and I would have done anything for them. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. They didn't come to me just for advice or support anymore. Now, it felt like they only reached out when there was something to gain. And that's what hurt the most. The realization that my children had grown up with a sense of entitlement, a belief that everything I worked for was simply theirs for the taking. Looking back, I can see the signs I missed. How Sarah would subtly push for things that weren't hers. How Daniel began talking more about what I would do with the house than how we were going to manage my illness. It was all about ownership, about control, and in my naivete, I had believed they were simply doing what was best for me. I never imagined they could be so focused on the inheritance, so eager to push me aside as if I no longer had any say in the matter. The turning point came when they started talking about my medical bills as if they were something to be managed rather than something to be shared. They didn't offer to help with the treatments or take a proactive role in my care. No, they were more concerned about securing their financial futures. When I overheard them discussing the sale of the house where they had grown up, I was blindsided. It wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for. The garden I had planted with my own hands, the kitchen where we had shared so many family meals, the rooms where they had spent their childhood. These were more than just bricks and mortar. And yet, they were already planning to sell it as though it had no meaning. It wasn't a home anymore. It was an asset, something to be liquidated for convenience, for the sake of ease. I tried to talk to them, to make them understand why it hurt. But each time I broached the subject, their responses grew more impatient. Mom, this isn't about you. It's about what's best for everyone. You should think about your health, not about holding on to things that weigh you down. That was the moment the anger started building within me. I had always believed that family was about mutual respect, about love, about shared experiences. But here I was, fighting for my life, and all they could think about was what they could gain from it. I had given them everything, and now they were taking it all without a second thought. I felt like a fool. I had spent years working hard to create a foundation for my family. I had spent countless hours teaching them, guiding them, loving them. And in return, they were stripping me of my dignity, taking what was mine, without even a second glance. But what hurt the most wasn't the money, or the house. It was the betrayal. I wasn't just a mother to them anymore. I was a resource, an asset to be managed. They didn't care about the emotional toll this would take on me. They didn't care about what this house meant to me. It wasn't about family anymore. It was about money. And that, in its rawest form, was the deepest wound of all. But there was one thing I had forgotten in all of this. One thing I hadn't realized until that moment of clarity, when the shock of everything hit me all at once. I had something they didn't. Something they hadn't counted on. I had control. And I wasn't about to let them take that from me, too. The battle was only just beginning. It was a strange thing to realize. My children were treating me like an obstacle. But it wasn't until I saw them start making decisions for me that the truth hit me in full force. It wasn't just about my estate. It was about something much deeper. It was about their belief that they could take everything I had worked for, without me ever being part of the process. They no longer saw me as their mother. I had become a liability, someone to be swept aside as they calculated the quickest way to claim my assets. That hurt in ways I couldn't even begin to explain. It had started slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first they were kind. Sarah made sure I had everything I needed for my treatment. Daniel checked in regularly, his voice full of reassurance. But then there were the subtle comments. The suggestions about my future, and how they were just trying to make sure everything was in order. They weren't asking me for my opinions anymore. They were telling me what was best for me. It wasn't just about the house or the money, though that was the most obvious. It was the way they handled it all. The way they discussed the liquidation of my property like it was just another item on their to-do list. And every time they brought it up, they told me the same thing. You don't need this anymore. It's time to move on. They didn't care that this house had been more than just bricks and mortar to me. It had been my sanctuary, my hard-earned reward. This house was where my children had learned to walk, where we had celebrated birthdays, where I had spent countless hours making dinner, baking, listening to them laugh and argue over petty things. The house was a symbol of everything I had given them, of the years I had worked late into the night, of the sacrifices I had made to make sure they never went without. And they were treating it as though it had no emotional value, no meaning beyond what they could gain from it. I'll never forget the moment when I asked Sarah to slow down and just talk to me about it. I wanted to discuss the plan for the house, the finances, the future. It was my life, after all. But instead of sitting down with me like an adult, she simply waved me off, telling me to focus on my health, that there was no need for me to stress about material things. I could hear the patronizing tone in her voice, the one that said she was above me, above my worries, and that I should just accept that they knew better than I did. Mom, really. You should rest. We've got this under control. That was when I snapped. I didn't scream or lash out. I'm not that kind of person. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. You've got what under control, Sarah? I asked, my voice trembling. My life. My legacy? My home. Sarah seemed taken aback by the sharpness in my voice, but she didn't apologize. Instead, she met my eyes with a cool expression that left me colder than anything else. We're just doing what's best for everyone, Mom. You need to let go. Let go. Those two words, spoken so casually, stung like nothing I had ever felt before. I had given up so much of myself for them, and they were asking me to let go of everything I had worked for. They were asking me to let them take what was mine and let them decide how it would be used. It was then that I understood the depth of their betrayal. They weren't concerned about my health. They were concerned with their inheritance. This was never about family, or love, or support. It was about power, about who controlled what. And it became clear that they saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. I couldn't believe it. The people I had loved, the ones I had sacrificed for, were treating me like a nuisance to be dealt with. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was an erasure. They were erasing me, my choices, and everything I had done for them. But what really shocked me was how easily they had done it. I had spent so many years pouring my love, time, and energy into building them a future, and in a matter of weeks, they had dismantled it all without a second thought. I had to fight back. I had to protect what was mine. The problem was, I had never planned for a fight. I had always been the provider, the protector, the one who managed everything behind the scenes. I had never been the one to stir the pot, to make waves. But now I had no choice. So, I started to look into my options. I knew I couldn't rely on my children to do what was right. But I didn't want to make a mess of it either. I didn't want to lose everything in a bitter, drawn-out legal battle. I had to be strategic. The first step was getting my hands on the documents they had been so casually shuffling around. The ones that gave them control over my estate. I'd seen them, of course. They'd left them out on the dining table. Documents about the liquidation of the property, papers about power of attorney, about the medical decisions they'd already taken over me. They didn't even wait for my permission. They just moved forward, thinking I wouldn't notice, thinking I wouldn't care. But I cared. I cared more than they would ever understand. I contacted an attorney. Someone I had worked with in the past, someone I knew was discreet and professional. I told him what had been happening and asked him to review the legal documents my children had prepared. His reaction was immediate. "They don't have the authority to do this without your consent," he said. "You still hold all the power. It's time to take control back." That was the moment I realized that I wasn't as powerless as they thought I was. The power had always been in my hands, but I had been too trusting, too focused on my illness to see the bigger picture. I wasn't just a victim in this. I had options. But there was a twist. There was one detail I hadn't been told by my children. Something they didn't even realize they were giving me access to. Hidden in the fine print of the estate plan, buried in a legal clause I had nearly missed, was something that could change everything. I had always been the one to protect them, to make sure they never faced hardship. But now, it was time to turn the tables. They had underestimated me. They had assumed that, because I was sick and vulnerable, I wouldn't notice their underhanded tactics. But I had learned the hard way that sometimes you have to fight back. And when the time came, I would be ready. What they didn't know yet was that the game had changed. It was no longer about their inheritance. It was about my future, and I was going to reclaim it, no matter what it took. The first move was already set in motion. I had already made the call, already put the plan in action. The twist they hadn't seen coming would soon be revealed. And when it was, they would understand exactly what I had been fighting for all along. But I wasn't going to make this easy for them. It was time to turn the tables. The fight for my legacy had begun. I sat there, the weight of everything settling heavily in my chest as I waited for the phone call. I had made my decision. There was no going back. The last few weeks had been nothing but confusion, disappointment, and betrayal. But now, I had something I hadn't had before. Power. It was a strange feeling, to be on the other side of the table, to finally have the upper hand after everything that had been taken from me. The phone rang, and I picked it up without hesitation. My attorney's voice was calm, reassuring, but there was something in the way he spoke that told me things were about to change. "We've got everything we need," he said. "The documents are in order. I've filed the motion with the court. It's time." It was time to turn the tables. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. The fog that had surrounded me ever since my diagnosis began to lift. I had spent so much time focused on the wrong things, on my illness, on my family's well-being, on letting them take control without asking questions. But now, everything I needed was in my hands. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't the victim anymore. I had power. Real, tangible power. What I hadn't realized, until my attorney had pointed it out, was that the will they had drawn up, one I had unwittingly signed years ago, wasn't as ironclad as they thought. In fact, it contained several loopholes, flaws in the way the estate had been set up that, if used properly, could invalidate the very decisions they had been making about my property. The language was vague. It was open to interpretation. And with a little creative maneuvering, I could take back everything that was rightfully mine. I could feel my heart beat faster as I realized the full scope of what I was about to do. I had been so careful, so trusting for so many years. But my children hadn't been careful. They had been careless. They thought they could control everything, thinking I was too weak to fight back. They underestimated me, and now I had a chance to make them realize just how wrong they were. As I hung up the phone, I looked out the window. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. There was something symbolic in that moment, something that felt like a new beginning. In the distance, I could see the house that had been at the center of this entire ordeal. It had been my home, my sanctuary. But now, it was more than just a house. It was a battleground. A symbol of everything I had worked for, and everything I had to fight to protect. I took a deep breath. I had one chance to get this right. If I made a mistake, if I let my emotions get in the way, everything could fall apart. The plan had to be executed perfectly. No mistakes. No second chances. The first step was to make sure they knew nothing. I had to move in silence. My children had no idea that I was aware of the legal loopholes, or that I had already started taking steps to reclaim control of my estate. I had to keep them in the dark, keep them thinking they were still in charge, until it was too late. I set up a meeting with my attorney. He laid out the plan in detail. It was bold, and it was risky. But it was the only way I could ensure that my wishes were honored, that my legacy would be protected. The court motion was only the beginning. We needed to get the legal framework in place so that when the time came, I would have the authority to make all decisions regarding my estate. All decisions. I would be the one in control. Once the motion was filed, there was a period of waiting. During that time, I watched my children continue their relentless pursuit of the estate. They sold off valuables. They made arrangements with banks and financial institutions. They thought they were on the verge of taking everything. They thought they had already won. But what they didn't realize was that I had been setting things in motion behind the scenes. I was building my own case, quietly working with my attorney to ensure that when the time came, I would be the one with the legal authority. They had overstepped, assumed too much, and now they would pay the price. In the meantime, I kept my distance. I didn't let on that I was aware of their plans. Every conversation felt like a lie, every smile a facade. They were still trying to convince me that selling the house, moving my assets, and making decisions without my input were in my best interest. They were still trying to paint me as the helpless victim, the frail mother who couldn't possibly manage her own affairs. I played along, pretending to be the dutiful, trusting parent. I let them think they were winning. But inside I was ready. And when the time came, I would take back what was rightfully mine. The waiting was agonizing. Every day felt like a test of my patience. My body grew weaker, but my resolve only strengthened. I refused to let this illness define me. I refused to let it take everything I had fought for. This was my last fight, my final chance to take back control, and I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. Then, the day came when the court hearing was scheduled. It felt like a turning point. My heart raced as I walked into the courtroom with my attorney by my side. For a moment, I thought about everything that had led up to this. The years of hard work, the sacrifices, the love I had poured into my family. I thought about how my children had betrayed me, how they had taken everything for granted, how they had assumed I would just fade into the background. But I wasn't fading. I was fighting. And I was going to win. The judge listened to the evidence, listened to both sides, and after what felt like an eternity, he made his decision. My children's actions were declared invalid. The estate would remain under my control, as it should have been all along. The moment the judge's gavel fell, I felt a rush of emotions flood through me, relief, vindication, but also a sense of loss. My children weren't the people I thought they were. The betrayal had cut deeper than I could have ever imagined, and it was hard to reconcile that with the love I had always given them. But I had done it. I had taken back control. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. I had reclaimed my power, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my dignity. But there was still one thing left to do. I had to face my children. They would be furious. They would accuse me of being petty, of holding on to things that didn't matter. But I was done letting them manipulate me. It was time to speak the truth. To tell them how their betrayal had broken me, and how I would never again let them take what was rightfully mine. The game was over. And this time, I was the one in control. The final confrontation was inevitable, and it was coming. But now I was ready. The days after the court ruling were filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. It was strange to walk through my house, knowing that my children's plans had been thwarted. The estate was mine once again, and with it, the control I had fought so hard to reclaim. But even in that victory, there was a shadow that lingered, one that made my heart heavy with the knowledge that my children would never see me the same way again. What had started as a fight for my own dignity had now turned into a full-blown rupture in our family. I knew there was no going back. They would never forgive me for what I had done. And yet, as much as I feared the coming confrontation, a part of me knew it was necessary. I had always put them first, always worked to make sure they had everything they needed, but in doing so, I had allowed them to take everything I had worked for. I had given them too much power, too much control, and it had cost me my peace of mind, my self-respect, and my trust in them. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Sarah was the first to show up at my door. Her face was unreadable as she stepped inside, her body language stiff and defensive. She didn't even say hello. She just walked into the living room, sitting down across from me, her eyes locked onto mine with a gaze that was both cold and angry. "You know you've made a huge mistake, right?" she said, her voice clipped, sharp. "We were just trying to help. Trying to do what was best for you." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I just stared at her, trying to find the daughter I once knew in the face that now seemed so foreign to me. But all I could see was someone who had been consumed by greed, someone who saw my life and my legacy as nothing more than a stepping stone. "I don't need your help," I said quietly, the words coming out with a finality I hadn't intended. "Not like that. Not when it means taking everything from me." Her eyes flashed with a mixture of frustration and confusion. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "We were doing this for you. To make it easier. To make sure you weren't left with all this burden." I shook my head slowly, feeling the anger begin to rise within me. "You weren't doing it for me. You were doing it for yourselves. You wanted my house, my business, everything I've worked for. And you took advantage of me, of my illness. You didn't think I'd notice, did you? You didn't think I'd fight back." Sarah's face softened for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something. Regret, maybe. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same cold mask she had been wearing for weeks. "You don't know what it's like, Mom," she said, her voice quieter now. "You don't know what it's like to try and manage everything. Your health, the business, the house. We were just trying to make it easier for you. And for us." The words stung, not because they were true, but because of the selfishness behind them. They had never once considered how it felt for me to be pushed aside, to be treated as though my life and my choices didn't matter. "No, Sarah," I said firmly. "You don't understand. You never did. You thought you could take everything from me without consequences. But there are consequences. You may not like it, but I am the one who decides what happens with my life, my estate, my legacy. Not you. Not anyone." I could see the anger rising in her again, her hands clenched into fists. "You've ruined everything," she spat, standing up abruptly. "You've made it impossible for us to move forward. Everything we've done, everything we've worked for, you've thrown it all away." I stood as well, feeling a surge of emotion. "You didn't work for anything, Sarah. You've been living off of me for years. And now you've taken what was mine, thinking I wouldn't fight for it." Her face twisted in anger. "You're impossible. We've always been there for you, and this is how you repay us? By stripping us of everything we've worked for? We could have been a family. But now you've ruined it." I took a step toward her, my voice unwavering. "You ruined it when you decided that money and power meant more than family. You betrayed me. And now, you'll have to live with the consequences of your actions." I could see her struggling with the weight of my words, but she didn't back down. With a final glance, She turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I didn't feel relief or triumph, though. Instead, a cold emptiness settled over me. This wasn't what I had wanted. I hadn't wanted to destroy my family, but I had to. I had to protect myself, protect what was mine. Later that evening, Daniel came by, though his visit was quieter, less charged with anger. He didn't storm in like Sarah had, but there was a heavy silence between us as he sat across from me. He looked at me, his eyes full of frustration, but there was something else there too. Sadness, maybe. "Mom, this didn't have to happen," he said, his voice low. "We just wanted to help. You're not going to be around much longer, and we didn't want you to leave us with a mess." I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "You didn't help me, Daniel. You didn't even ask me what I wanted. You took what wasn't yours, and you thought I wouldn't notice. Well, I noticed. And now you have to live with the consequences of your choices." Daniel stared at the floor, the words sinking in. He didn't respond immediately, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. But when he finally looked up at me, there was something in his eyes that felt almost like regret. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't think about how you'd feel. I just wanted to make things easier." I nodded, feeling a flicker of something. Hope, maybe. "I know you didn't, Daniel. But that's the problem. You didn't think about me. You didn't think about what I wanted." We both sat there for a long time in silence, the weight of everything hanging in the air between us. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a slight sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to understand. It wasn't a perfect resolution. The damage had been done, and I wasn't sure what the future held for my relationship with my children. But for the first time in a long time, I knew that I had regained control of my life. I had fought back, not just for my property or my legacy, but for my dignity. And in the end, that was what mattered most. As I stood up and walked to the window, I looked out at the setting sun, the sky painted in deep reds and purples. The world outside was still turning, still moving forward. And so was I. My future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time, it was mine to decide. I had taken back what was mine, and that, in the end, was all that mattered.